Israel Update with Gadi Taub and Mike Duran.
Hello and welcome to another in-depth special edition of Israel Update. And our guest today is Professor KOBI MICHAEL, who is a senior fellow at the INSS and at the Misgav Institute, and also with vast experience in government and in the army, all of which, the academic career, the fellowship, the experience in the army, and the experience in government have to do with the Israeli-Palestinian relationships. Professor Michael, hello.
Hi, good evening, Gadi.
So tell us a little bit before we dive into Hamas and its tactics and the relations to Iran and everything else, a little bit about your experience. What exactly did you do in the army and in the service of the Israeli government?
Most of the years I served as senior officer at the military intelligence, and I dealt there with the Palestinian issue as well. I served many years in the Gaza Strip. During my military service, I had I would say, the historical privilege, if I can term it like that, to be one of the founders and the first commander of the Israeli-Palestinian security apparatus in the south part of the Gaza Strip that was established following the Gaza and Jericho First Agreement that was signed in Cairo in May 4th, 1994. Later on, I commanded the entire Israeli-Palestinian security coordination apparatus in the West Bank, in the entire West Bank. During my military service during these years, I was involved in parts of the official negotiation with the Palestinians as part of the Oslo process, the security negotiations. And after my retirement from the military service, I spent several years in track 2 negotiations with the Palestinians at the National Security Council as the head of the Palestinian division, later on as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the head of the Palestinian division. And during my academic career, I dealt with the Palestinian issue as well, and at the INSS in the last 11 years.
So you've been immersed in these issues.
Yes, for more than three decades, from all the dimensions that you can think about, and I'm very familiar with the geography, demography, the culture, the politics, and even the persons. So
were you optimistic in the beginning, in the heyday of the Oslo Accords? Did you think they have a good chance? They had a good chance?
Yes, even very optimistic, but my optimism actually, I would say, disappeared after several months when I had the experience on the ground, mainly with regard to the joint patrols, the Israeli-Palestinian joint patrols, when I understood that it is almost an impossible mission. The idea that actually you meet on the ground all the Palestinians that came from the Palestinian diaspora, and you understand that actually they brought with them and they duplicated I would say, the organizational DNA of the PLO into the Palestinian Authority DNA, political DNA. And you understand that eventually we are dealing with a sort of a failed entity, which is not capable not to build a state, not to run a state, and I'm not sure that they are willing to do that. And they are deeply, deeply embedded in the Palestinian ethos, in the Palestinian history, in the Palestinian victimhood. With the accumulated experience later on in the West Bank, it became to be clearer and clearer that actually the train goes to nowhere. I mean that water will not come out from this
Rock.
rock.
And
Yes.
Zionism had the rare ability to transform itself from a revolutionary movement, or at least a revolution in Jewish life, into mamlachtiyut, what we say in Hebrew, very hard to translate. It's not exactly statism, it's maybe republicanism with a small r, to make the transformation from a revolutionary movement to institutionalize a state and orderly life. The Palestinians, you told me in a previous conversation that we had in Hebrew, took a revolutionary terroristic movement, and according to what you say, they did not transform into anything else. They just took
Yes.
all that and put it
Yes.
into the Palestinian Authority. And now we have, yes.
This was the historical failure, the historical tragedy of the Palestinian people, that the Palestinian leadership was not able to make the transformation process from the revolutionary resistance, national resistance movement, the PLO, to a state building process, which is the Palestinian Authority, okay? And instead of concentrating on building a functioning, vital civil society, economy, state institutions, and actually to create or to build a corridor or to path to independence and functioning Palestinian state, independent Palestinian state, they were concentrated in continuing the historical struggle against Israel, and they brought all the political DNA, the very, very bad, I would say, manners of the PLO with regard to corruption, nepotism, to the Palestinian Authority itself, and therefore, from the first beginning,
and terrorism, because we now
yes,
have
yeah, I mean, from the
two
first
reports.
beginning,
We now have two
yes,
reports out saying that many of the Palestinian security apparatus personnel, after they finish their work, also moonlight as terrorists, and some of them end up in Israeli jails, and they are proud of it. But my question is, Kobi, do you think this Palestinian Authority can be, as the Americans now say, revitalized?
Look, I really have some difficulties in understanding the American approach or the American understanding with regard to the Palestinian arena, because they see, or at least according to the official publications, that the replacement of one Muhammad with another Muhammad, I mean the replacement of Muhammad al-Shtaya by Muhammad Mustafa, is the first beginning, I would say, of the reforms process that the Palestinian Authority, that the current Palestinian Authority is going to go through, to the way of revitalized Palestinian Authority. It looks that the Americans are very optimistic in this regard. I cannot understand what is exactly the logic behind this optimism, because I think that nothing has been changed in the Palestinian Authority in this regard, and the replacement of one Muhammad with another Muhammad, mainly with when Muhammad Mustafa, the new appointed prime minister, used to be a deputy prime minister in a previous Palestinian government. He was a minister, and he is the closest economic advisor of Abu Mazen, okay, that helped Abu Mazen and his sons and family, and some others from the very close cycle around Abu Mazen, to continue with their corruption and to continue stealing and robbing the Palestinian economy and the Palestinian people. And he is a member of the Central Committee of the PLO. Okay, so I really cannot understand how exactly he is going to do all the required reforms in the Palestinian Authority. And it is pretty clear that Abu Mazen and the old guard of the Fatah are not interested in reforms. of the Palestinian Authority, because a revitalized Palestinian Authority means a Palestinian Authority without Abu Mazen and all the old guard. And who is Muhammad Mustafa? Muhammad Mustafa is I would say, the headstone of this old guard.
But you're saying about this particular change, what is there another option? Is there someone waiting in the wings that can answer the wishes of the American administration
no,
for a peaceful state building, nation building force in the Palestinian society? Is there such a force?
I don't see him, or I don't see her. Okay.
Sure, her is probably very likely.
Uh, Look, I think that we have to understand that we are dealing with a very problematic Palestinian society, or I would say with a very problematic psychological infrastructure of the Palestinian society, where the current Palestinian leadership is one of the reflections of this very problematic psychological infrastructure. Because the psychological infrastructure of the entire Palestinian society, and here we have to distinguish between individuals, okay, because there are some very good Palestinians among the Palestinian collective who are seeking peace and want peace and are willing to do efforts and even concessions for peace. But we have to distinguish between individuals and the Palestinian collective. And I'm talking about the Palestinian collective and the psychological infrastructure
Yes.
of the Palestinian collective. And in this regard, this psychological infrastructure is very, very problematic because it is still based on two major pillars. Okay, the first one is the victimhood pillar, which means the refugeehood, the Palestinian refugeehood, the right of return, which is the other side of the coin of the reluctancy to recognize in the right of self-determination of the Jewish people, or the right of the state of Israel to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people in any borders. And the other pillar is the armed resistance. And as long as yes, and as long as these are the two major pillars of this psychological infrastructure, we cannot be surprised that the vast majority of the Palestinian constituency, even today, 6 months after the atrocities of October 7th, still support. The vast majority still supports the atrocities of October 7th. And the vast majority, okay, believes that Hamas should remain in power in the Gaza Strip. And Hamas is stronger politically than Fatah if elections would have held today. Okay, and I'm talking about the figures that were published just a few days ago in the last poll that was conducted by Khalil Shkarki.
In the Judea and Samaria, also in the West Bank?
Yes.
Hamas would win.
You know, in a very paradoxical manner, Hamas is stronger in the West Bank in comparison to the Gaza Strip, and the West Bankers are more extremists with regard to Hamas and its ideology and October 7th, okay, and the support in the armed resistance in comparison to the Gazans. But generally speaking, about the Palestinian constituency as a whole, we are talking about the vast majority that supports the atrocities, about a very broad political support in Hamas. And I think that all the findings of the last poll that was conducted in March are very concerning. And therefore, I think that the Americans who believe in the idea of revitalized Palestinian Authority under the current circumstances have to go down, to the earth and to internalize the findings and the meaning of the findings. And Yahya Sinwar became to be the new Salah ad-Din in the eyes of the Palestinians, and not only the Gazans. So I really have some difficulties to understand the American optimism in this regard.
Kobi, I'm tempted to go through the whole Israeli-Hamas relationship with you, as I did in the Hebrew podcast, but the most important to me is the last phase. Maybe in the end we'll go back to the past, as it were, and talk about anything before 2018. But when I spoke to you last time, you explained that 2018 was a watershed in which a strategy to destroy Zionism was hatched, and which the Hamas and its allies in Tehran and elsewhere believe is going to work. So what is it that happened in 2018?
In 2018, we have the return marches along the border with the Gaza Strip, and this is
Let's explain what it is to those of our listeners who don't know
yes,
them. They conducted, I'll just say a few words. These were demonstrations in which crowds marched towards the border fence, and they called them the marches of return, as in the right of return, supposedly to breach the fence and go back to what they say is their home, which is Israel proper.
yes. And these organized and well-orchestrated demonstrations, mainly in Fridays after the prayers in the mosques, actually were used by Hamas in order to get closer and closer to the border, and in order to understand or to build I would say the intelligence picture, very broad intelligence picture with regard the operational routine of the IDF forces, in order to challenge the IDF, in order to make damages to the physical barrier there.
And in order to establish the precedent that they can get closer to the fence without being shot, without
yes,
being deterred.
and in order to create unrest that will pressure the Israelis to provide them with more benefits, mainly economic benefits, that will enable the Israelis to reach to the desired calm, okay, along the border. Hamas understood pretty well that Israel became to be addicted to the idea of calm, okay, the idea of pause along the border. And in 2018, they actually began a sort of, I would say, bargaining or negotiation with Israel, saying that they will be willing to calm the demonstrations, okay, if Israel will provide them with A, B, and C. And actually, Israel provided Hamas with A, B, and C. And Hamas played the game, and Hamas actually blinded Israel and gave Israel the sense or the feeling or the understanding that Hamas is responsible and accountable as a sovereign ruler, and Hamas is interested in creating calm in order to develop economically the Gaza Strip, in order to improve the humanitarian situation, in order to reconstruct the Gaza Strip.
And all this has camouflage to the plan that was being
yeah,
put together to attack Israel.
yes, and the
Already
idea
then.
was yes, and the idea was to blind the Israelis, to give them the sense that Hamas is interested, as I said, in calm, and in the very same time to use the umbrella, okay, of the calm there, in order to fortify themselves militarily in the Gaza Strip as the main center of gravity, the main military center of gravity. And by keeping the Gaza Strip calm, they actually began in building their capacities in the other fronts that they work on. And I mean, by the other fronts, I mean East Jerusalem, the West Bank, South Lebanon, and the domestic front, inside the domestic front, inside the state of Israel, which means the Arab citizens of Israel. And the idea was actually to create a sort of a multi-front strategy, where the main center of gravity, the military center of gravity, will be the Gaza Strip, and they will build this center of gravity by using the calm and continue blinding the Israelis. And in the very same time, they will build the capacities in the other fronts, and they will build very unique capacities in East Jerusalem because they understood that East Jerusalem is eventually an explosive barrel that they can use in order to ignite the entire region, to ignite all the fronts that they worked very hard in order to prepare them in advance. Okay.
So they began penetrating the Arab sector of Israeli Arab citizens, East Jerusalem, the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, and cooperating with Hezbollah. How did they reach into the West Bank, the Judea and Samaria, and East Jerusalem, and most importantly, the Arab citizens of Israel? What did they do?
I assume that you remember the name Salah al-Arouri, okay? Salah al-Arouri, by the way, released from the Israeli prison, and he was expelled. Yes, and he was expelled to Turkey, and from Turkey he worked some years from Istanbul under the wings of the Turkish intelligence that enabled him to work freely from Istanbul, from Turkey. He was actually the leader of Hamas in the West Bank, okay? And his mission was to build Hamas capacities, Hamas terror infrastructure in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. He was the one that eventually, when he left Turkey to Syria, and from Syria to Lebanon under the wings of Nasrallah, he was the one that deepened and widened the channels vis-a-vis Iran.
He was recently assassinated. Assassinated is the right word?
Yes,
Khusal.
in
I'm looking
Beirut,
for Khusal.
in the Dahia in Beirut. Okay.
Under Nasrallah's nose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But did Israel accept responsibility for that?
Yes.
Mm.
And I think that we have to remember that Hamas is present there in the West Bank. Okay, and by the way, Hamas is present among the Arab citizens of Israel as well. I mean, all the northern Islamic branch, okay, or the northern Islam, the northern
northern branch
Muslim
of the
Brotherhood
Islamic
branch in
movement.
Israel. Yes, the northern branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in Israel, which, by the way, is out of the law. Okay, is banned. What is this if not Hamas? I mean, they are very, very close to Hamas. So there are people among the Arab citizens of Israel who identify themselves with Hamas ideology, and they are willing to help Hamas. And we met them in May 21 in the streets of the mixed cities in Israel. Okay, during the Guardian of the Walls operation in May 21. And many Palestinians in the West Bank are affiliated with Hamas. I mean, it's not an impossible mission for Hamas to recruit people and to train people and to provide them with weapons and with instructions to terrorize Jews and Israelis from the West Bank. And this is what they did, and they built their capacities. And I think that in May 21, they brought all of their capacities under the organizing rationale of the multi-front strategy. Okay, they brought it to the stage.
Let's say, Kobi, a few words about this, because in Israel this was a major trauma. Although the press tried to take the sting out of what really happened, and as you told me in another conversation, the army didn't draw the right conclusions. But this began with an ultimatum and ended up with lynches inside Israel, in cities where Jews and Arabs live. There were pogroms inside Israel, though we tried to forget them. So how did it all roll from an ultimatum to the multi-front eruption?
First of all, it was during the Ramadan. It was May 21. It was the Ramadan. And we know that Ramadan is a very sensitive period of time with its own dynamic and very unique characteristics. it is much easier to ignite people or to create an atmosphere or to use the atmosphere in order to escalate the situation. People are very charged. But in May 21, we are facing three problems simultaneously. We have the problem of the Jewish neighborhood Shimon HaTzadik in Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah is
East
the Palestinian
Jerusalem.
name. Yes. We had a problem with a Palestinian family that was evacuated from its house that belongs to a Jewish family. And those days, MK Ben Gvir opened his parliamentary bureau there in Sheikh Jarrah, and the atmosphere was, I would say, very tensioned. And in the same period of time, it was the Jerusalem Day, and we had the flag parade there in Jerusalem, and something that drives the Palestinians there crazy, okay, because this is one of the ultimate symbols of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem, and let's say frankly that there are some participants among the Israelis that are happy to provoke Palestinians, okay, using this flag march in order to provoke Palestinians. But it became to be a sort of a national holiday, okay, or a national, I would say, ceremony in Israel. And we had some clashes in Damascus Gate in the way to the Haram Sharif. And Hamas understood pretty well the situation, and they understood that
This is Temple Mount, just for
yes,
people who
yes,
don't
yes.
know the term. Haram and Sharif
Okay.
is their term for Temple Mounts. Yep.
Yes, and Hamas that understands pretty well what is the escalative potential of East Jerusalem and mainly Haram Sharif Temple Mount. They actually used it in order to prepare the right, I would say, excuse for escalating the situation. And they put an ultimatum to the Israeli government by saying that if until 6 p.m., okay, in the evening, the government of Israel will not evacuate Sheikh Jarrah and will not stop all the, I would say, the measures that were taken by the Israeli police with regard to Haram Sharif, Temple Mount, and Damascus Gate. And if the flags march will continue, then they are going to launch rockets toward Jerusalem. And of course, the government of Israel didn't accept the ultimatum. And at 6 p.m., they launched 7 rockets towards Jerusalem. It was the first time that rockets in this scale, in such a manner, were launched towards Jerusalem. And this is where we began the Guardian of the Walls operation, okay, in May 21. And
then everything erupted in the other
yes,
fronts.
yes, in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, South Lebanon. Okay, this was Hamas, South Lebanon, that works in a very coordinated manner, a very close cooperation with Hezbollah. And when we say Hezbollah, it means Iran, okay? Because everything is under the Iranian instructions and the Iranian authority or the Iranian intentions. And the worst thing in my eyes was the active participation of Arab citizens of Israel in the mixed cities. And we are talking about very, very dangerous riots, okay, and lynches and expressions of violence in the major cities in Israel. I mean, actually, all the mixed cities in Israel and even beyond, okay. And we are talking about an active participation of some thousands, okay, not too many thousands, fortunately, but few thousands. And here it's the law, I would say, of big numbers, because I think that the vast majority of the Arab citizens of Israel are not interested in initiating violence or terrorism against Israel. They are not Zionists. They do not like the idea that the state of Israel is the state of the Jewish people, but they accept it as a fact, okay, as a reality. And I think that most of them are interested in, I would say, in being integrated in the Israeli economy, in the Israeli society. And they are not interested in terrorism. But when we are talking about a minority of 2 million people, it is enough that only 1%, okay, will be a radical group. And we know that there are radical and extremists among the Arab citizens of Israel. And mainly if Hamas and Iran are making huge efforts in order to build capacities to recruit people, to try to convince people to organize themselves. So when we are talking about 1% from 2 millions,
That's a
it's a
lot.
very big number, a very effective number that can create a very dramatic chaos here inside the state of
Yeah,
Israel.
and it was a shock, and I have to mention in passing that the progressive press in Israel tried to frame the whole issue as violence on both sides. There's a big argument in the press, and the mainstream press declared it to be violence on both sides and calling on both sides to be calm. So we are now in 2021, Kobi, and Shomer HaChomot happened, the May riots and the Hamas attacks and the multi-front strategy. And Hamas saw this as a rehearsal, as a test.
Yes, and it was a very successful one because at the end of the operation, eventually Israel returned to the idea of getting calm or reaching calm in the Gaza Strip. And then we are negotiating with Hamas with regard to Palestinian workers that will enter from the Gaza Strip to work on a daily basis in Israel, and the quantities become higher and higher. We began from 7,000 and we have reached to 20,000 in October 6th, okay, a day before. And Israel became to be much, much more flexible with regard to import and export from the Gaza Strip, mainly with regard to the entrance of dual-use materials, okay, materials that can be used for civilian purposes, but in the very same time for military services purposes, like fertilizer or medical gases, okay, and things like that, that Israel before prevented their entrance to the Gaza Strip. And Israel helped Hamas with regard to infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, be it energy or water and sewage and desalination, and everybody was sure that we are in the most secure path towards, a functioning entity in the Gaza Strip where Hamas is a very reliable, responsible, and accountable ruler in the Gaza Strip, which is very interested in reconstructing the Gaza Strip and developing the Gaza Strip. But I think that since May 21, it was very clear that Hamas actually has a sort of a dual strategy. And the main idea or the organizing rationale of the dual strategy is that we will keep calm in the Gaza Strip and we will use this calm in order to fortify ourselves and to build our military capacities and to improve them. And when I'm talking about military capacities, I'm talking not only about weapons. I'm talking about all the idea of the tunnels and mainly the strategic tunnels, the operational room, technology, intelligence, and while keeping calm in the Gaza Strip and continue blinding the Israelis, building our capacities there, we will build the capacities and we will ignite the other fronts. And we have to remind our viewers that since March 22, we are in a terror campaign that became to be a terror war in the West Bank, okay, in the Judea and Samaria. And who is orchestrating and organizing all of this terror campaign? It began with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is fully supported by Iran. Okay, Iran smuggled weapons and money to the West Bank, mainly to Jenin area, to terrorist purposes of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But it didn't take too much time for Hamas to join the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And by the way, immediately after Hamas, or even simultaneously with Hamas, the Al-Aqsa battalion of Al-Fatah, which is the PA, okay? I mean, they belongs to the movement, which is the core bone of the Palestinian Authority. And unfortunately, in the last year or so, even less than a year, we are talking even about a very active participation of senior officers, or generally speaking, officers of the Palestinian Authority security apparatuses that were killed. We know about something like 70, okay, in the last year or so. Palestinian security officers that are paid by the Palestinian Authority, and in the day they serve as security officer or as officers in the security establishment, and in the night as terrorists. So 70 of them, or something like that, were killed by the IDF as terrorists because they participated actively in terror attacks against Israel, okay, in the last year or so. But you know how many people are relatives and even close relatives of Palestinian officials from the security establishment?
Who participate in terrorism.
Yes, yes. A son that participates in terrorism, where his father is a senior officer at the preventive intelligence of the Palestinian Authority, that where its main responsibility of this apparatus is to tackle terrorism. Okay, and his son is a terrorist. So Hamas is a very, I would say, essential, significant, substantial generator of terrorism in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, since March 22, since May 22. And Saleh al-Arouri played a very significant role in this regard. And when we say Saleh al-Arouri, we say Hezbollah and Iran as well, because Hamas deepened and widened the cooperation, the strategic cooperation with Tehran, because here we saw the integration or the combination between two strategies which are based on the same organizing rationale, which is the multi-front rationale. This is exactly the rationale that guided the Iranians when they built the fire ring around Israel by using their proxies. It began with Hezbollah in South Lebanon, then the Shiite militias that were brought by the Iranians from Eurasia, okay, to South Syria, and then the Iraqi Shiite militias in West Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. And these are four fronts that actually creates the fire ring around Israel. This is the life project of Qasem Soleimani. And the Palestinian arena is another component of this fire ring in the Iranian eyes. But in the very same time, okay, we have Hamas with the multi-front organizing rationale or multi-front strategy. And here the integration between these two strategies, and actually it takes us to October 7th. And if you ask me, I think that the main motivation of Yahya Sinwar and all the gang with him that initiated the murderous attack of October 7th was the idea of igniting all the fronts that they have prepared in advance. And they were sure that they have a sort of a guarantee or insurance policy from the Iranians that once they will ignite all the fronts that they have prepared in advance, then the Iranians are going to ignite or to activate all the other fronts in the firing that they have prepared in advance, and this will be the beginning of the end of the Zionist project. Okay, I don't believe that Yahya Sinwar thought, or even the Iranian thought, that by launching this attack they are going to destroy the state of Israel in this stage, but they deeply believe that this will drag the state of Israel to such a massive attrition war that Israel will not be able to come out of that. Okay, Israel will not be able to recover itself, and then we will attack Israel by waves, a wave after a wave, a wave after a wave. We will keep Israel under a continuing attrition war until the state of Israel, the Zionist projects will collapse. Okay, and we have to understand that these people, that they are very religious people, they don't think in terms that we as Western people think. They think differently. Okay, they think in religious terms. They don't think about today or tomorrow. They think in terms of centuries, of many years to come. And they say, we will not be able to finish the war. Our sons and grandsons and great-grandsons will finish the war, will finish the job. But if the Crusaders were here 100 years, okay, the Jews will be here 200 years. At the end of the day, they will not be here. We are going to eliminate them. And this should have been the first beginning of the elimination process. And I'm sure, I have no doubt that this actually was the motivation that guided Yahya Sinwar and the others around him. Of course, there were some additional reasons. Okay, they wanted to undermine the normalization process with Saudi Arabia because they understood pretty well, I mean Hamas and Iran, that this is something that works against their interests. And I'm sure that they were willing to release Palestinian prisoners because this is something that belongs to the Palestinian ethos, and this is something that will bring them to the front of the stage in the eyes of the Palestinian constituency. And yes, they wanted to bring also the Palestinian issue to the attention of the international community. But all of these reasons are very marginal, I think, or if not very marginal in comparison to the main motivation that I've described before. And fortunately, the success of Yahya Sinwar in this regard was very limited because, right, the other fronts were ignited, and we see an active participation of Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Shiite militias in South Syria and even in West Iraq. Yes, we see it, but it is not in the scale that Yahya Sinwar anticipated. It is not in the scale that Yahya Sinwar understood as the insurance policy that was provided by the Iranians, okay? And in this regard, I think that he is very frustrated.
Do you think that he surprised the Iranians? Was this did he jump the gun? Did he not wait until they finished their nuclear project or some other time?
Yes,
Is Tehran furious?
I think that he surprised the Iranians. I mean, look, the Iranians were very deeply involved in all the preparations of this attack. Let's not be confused in this regard. They trained the Nukhba inside the Gaza Strip and outside the Gaza Strip. They occupied them with weapons, with technology, with intelligence, with money. And there is no doubt that the grand plan was very, very well coordinated with a very deep involvement of the Iranians. But the timing was a surprise for the Iranians. And I can only guess or estimate why Yahya Sinwar decided to surprise the Iranians and Hezbollah. But I think that the Iranians were furious in this regard because the Iranians don't like the idea of being surprised or losing control over such a process. And I think that when Yahya Sinwar decided to launch this attack on October 7th without fully coordinating it with the Iranians didn't like the idea at all. But in the very same time, they couldn't do nothing, okay? And this is the reason that they did what they did, and they enabled Hezbollah to create the kinetic diplomacy equation vis-a-vis the Israel that we are facing for 6 months. And they enabled or even pushed the Shiite militias in South Syria and in West Iraq to retaliate in this way or another, even against the Americans and the Houthis. But we have to remember that all the Iranian proxies, okay, although they are supported by the Iranians, and although I would say, obliged to the Iranians, they also very independent, or they have an independent agenda or agenda of their own, interests of their own. And we see it mainly with the Houthis, by the way. It means that Iran cannot control 100% its proxies, but it can influence them in a very significant manner. And when Iran will want to stop it, it will be stopped. The problem is that Iran has no incentive to stop, because the Americans, unfortunately, provide the Iranians with a sort of a comfort zone. And as long as the Americans are hesitating, or I would say reluctant to attack Iranian assets, or even, to harden or to increase the economic sanctions against the Iranians have no incentive to do something that will stop or will seize their proxies. And I think that this is another, I would say, failure of the American strategy here in the region, following our discussions about the Qatarians, okay, and some other mistakes that were done by the Americans, including, by the way, the pressure on Israel, okay, or at least the very explicit pressure on Israel. Because what we see, Yahya Sinwar sees, even when he is, 60 meters beneath the ground, he knows exactly what is going there on the ground. And
as long as America is applying pressure, why should he be flexible?
Of course.
No.
Not it's not only pressure. He sees the built tension here, the tension that was built between Israel and the United States, and he says to himself, if the United States is able to pressure Israel, which is the closest ally of the United States here in the region, in such a manner, and if President Biden, okay, just echoes the narrative of Hamas. I was astonished that in the State of the Union, okay, of President Biden, he just echoed the narrative of Hamas by saying, by mentioning even the number of 30,000 fatalities among the Palestinians, without distinguishing between innocent civilians and terrorists, okay, without mentioning that the collateral damage ratio that was achieved in the Gaza Strip during this war, in the most complicated urban zone in the world ever, is the lowest ever. I mean, there is no any military in the world that succeeded in achieving such a low ratio of collateral damage. We are talking about a ratio of 1 to 1.7, something like that, when the average ratio is 1 to 9 or 1 to 7. Okay.
Just to explain, we talk about ratio of civilians killed to combatants killed. So yes, for every military Hamas man, there is 1.7 civilians hurt, as opposed to 7 or 9 in other.
When the average, countries, according to the UN, okay, when the average is between 1 to 7 to 1 to 9, okay.
In other wars. Yeah.
Yes, and what we see there in the Gaza Strip, I mean, the complexity and the characteristics of this urban warfare zone is something that the humankind has not met ever. I mean, such a big organization, which is so deeply embedded in the civil society, people are talking about the innocent Palestinians. Yes, there are innocent people among the Palestinians, I have no doubt about it. But we have to remember that we are talking about the collective, going back to the beginning of our discussion, okay? And the Palestinian collective in the Gaza Strip supports Hamas. It supported Hamas before October 7th, during October 7th, and after October 7th. And when we see that, something like 80% from the buildings, the civilian residential buildings and civilian facilities that were that were that the IDF has reached to, okay, were infected by Hamas.
Yeah.
Okay, and when we see that 80% in the last poll of Shkaki in the Gaza Strip inform that at least
Shkaki is a
one,
Palestinian opinion poll surveyor.
yes, they report that at least one relative of them was killed or wounded in the war. So I'm asking myself, if 80% of the entire families of the Gaza Strip, okay, have relatives that were killed in this war, what does it mean with regard to the level that Hamas is embedded in this civil society? Okay, and the idea that this civil society, after 6 months of war and all the destruction and all the agony and the miserable that Hamas brought on their heads, they still want Hamas to remain the sovereign power of the Gaza Strip, and they still support Hamas. So how exactly we can talk about innocent population?
Yeah, yeah. Apparently, these are not the right terms for this war. Professor KOBI MICHAEL, it's been a pleasure, very enlightening, and I think we should do what we did in the Hebrew and already find a time for episode number 2, because we didn't cover the beginning of the history of the Israeli-Hamas relationship, which I also want to talk to you about. Thank you for being so generous with your time and coming on this show.
Thank you for having me. See you in chapter B.
See you.